Hello and welcome to the Real Time Fantasy Sports Show. I'm Jeff Power, senior writer for Real Time Fantasy Sports. I'm joined again by Logan Glasser of Real Time Fantasy Sports. Logan, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jeff.
We're going to do our start, sits, and sleepers for week 2 of the NFL season. Before we get to that, though, Logan, we got a pretty cool prop bet that we're running tonight here at Real Time Fantasy Sports. Today's Thursday, if you're watching this, August 15th. So this is for the Thursday night game.
Correct.
Chiefs and Chargers should be a tremendous game. So tell us about what we're doing.
Yeah, so we're running a promotional line tonight. So you can get Justin Herbert over under 0.5 passing TDs, which odds are that he's gonna hit that over. So that's a little freebie in that pick'em section. Go ahead and select that over if you want to take a risk on that, and you can win up to 20 times your entry fee with it. Just go 5 for 5 on your picks, or you can even just do 2 picks together and times your entry fee by 3 times. So
awesome. Yeah, the pick'em stuff is very popular, a lot of fun to do. So
extremely popular week 1. We got lines up for all the different games, tons of different player props. We got fantasy points, we got over under in passing yards, receiving yards, rushing. So take a look into that.
If they want to get into it, how do they do it? rtsports.com/pick'em.
So go ahead and go into the daily lobby, and then there's an option for pick'em. Just go ahead and click on that, and then you can look at all those over-unders.
All right, let's get into these start, sits, and sleepers for week 2, Logan. We're going to start at the quarterback position. Who's your start for this week?
Yeah, my start for quarterback this week is Carson Wentz. So he finished actually number 3 overall in fantasy points week 1. He saw a lot of different options at wide receiver week 1. He's got Terry McLaurin. He had a long touchdown pass. You also got Jahan Dotson. Curtis Samuel kind of came out of nowhere in week 1 after having an injury season last year. And Antonio Gibson played really well, and McKissick. So you got 2 pass-catching backs out of the backfield, and Wentz could put up a lot of points. So I'm going to have him as my start this week.
Logan Thomas, too. Don't forget about him. Came back
of course,
from injury.
And they're going to be playing Detroit this week, so it should be a high-scoring affair.
All right, I like Kirk Cousins a lot this week. I thought he looked great in his Vikings debut. He threw for 277 yards and 2 touchdowns without an interception. He topped 20 fantasy points in the game. He plays the Eagles this week. They allowed a lot of fantasy points to the Detroit Lions, who you just talked about in that last segment. They scored a lot of fantasy points against the Eagles defense last week. I think it's going to be more of the same for the Vikings. The Eagles allowed 386 total yards of offense in that game. I think Cousins is a top 10 fantasy quarterback in week 2. All right, who's your sit for this one?
Yeah, for my sit this week, I'm going to go with Tom Brady. So Tampa Bay offense has a lot of injuries after week 1. So Chris Godwin is going to be out for week 2. They're playing a tough Saints D. Mike Evans and Julio Jones are both banged up. So they're both coming into this as questionable as well. So his options are very limited this week. Again, playing a very tough Saints defense, and I expect this to kind of be a low-scoring game between Tampa Bay.
Offensive line's a little beat up, too.
Exactly. And Fournette's even banged up as well.
Yeah.
So
they're a mess. Okay, I don't like Trevor Lawrence this week, the Jacksonville Jaguars. He had accuracy issues once again last week, 24-42, not very good throwing the ball accurately. He did throw for 275 yards, but he had just a score, failed to top 20 fantasy points. I'm looking for more of the same. I need him to be more consistent for me to use him on my fantasy team. He plays the Colts this week. They have a very good defense, very good front four. In 2 games against the Colts last year, he had 2 touchdowns, failed to throw for 200 yards in one of those games, so I'm just staying away from Trevor Lawrence. Let's look at the sleeper spot for the quarterback now. Logan, who do you got?
Yeah, I'm going with Matt Ryan as my sleeper for fantasy week 2. Matt Ryan had over 350 passing yards week 1. He only scored 1 touchdown against Houston, but this is an absolute must-win game for Indianapolis, even though it's only week 2. After missing the playoffs last year, they brought in Matt Ryan. They have to get a win this week against Jacksonville, who knocked them out last year from that very last game. I expect Indianapolis offense to be on point this week. Him and Michael Pittman worked very well together week 1, and I expect that to continue in week 2.
Yeah, I loved seeing that connection do well because I have a ton of Michael Pittman on my team. I like Marcus Mariota as a sleeper this week with Atlanta. Thought he had a solid opener, 23.4 fantasy points against a good Saints defense. I love his floor because of his ability to run the ball. He ran for 72 yards and a touchdown last week. The Rams, that's who he plays this week, really struggled against the pass. Jalen Ramsey did not look good. I know it was a tough matchup against a great receiver, but still, Jalen Ramsey did not look great. They allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks in week 1 against that very good Buffalo team. I think the Falcons are going to likely be playing from behind in this matchup. Mariota might have to throw the ball more. I think he could be a good sneaky play for fantasy teams. Let's move on to the running back spot now, Logan. How about your start at the running back spot for this week?
For week 2, I'm for sure going to be starting Miles Sanders. A lot of leagues, he was kind of borderline if you're going to be starting him week 1 because there was a lot of criticism with him as running back, and it's almost Kenneth Gainwell taking over that lead running back role. But I feel very confident starting Miles Sanders. He finally scored a touchdown in fantasy week 1. He went all of last season without one. What was a little bit concerning was the Eagles had 4 different players had a rushing touchdown in week 1, which Sanders only had 1, but you also had Gainwell, Boston Scott, and Jalen Hurts had a rushing touchdown. But Miles Sanders saw the bulk of carries, and I expect that to continue in week 2.
I don't get the hate for Miles Sanders in that offense, though. I feel like
his ADP dropped so much.
Yeah. Well, I'm just talking about the Eagles coaching staff. They don't seem to have a ton of faith in him for whatever reason, but I think he's clearly the top back.
He is, yeah.
So hopefully he starts getting to work. Another situation that's similar, in my opinion, I still have him as a start this week, Javonte Williams. He looked great last week, but again, losing carries to Melvin Gordon, I don't think that's going to be a huge issue this week, even if that happens again. He's still going to post big numbers. He was heavily involved in the passing game, 11 catches for 65 yards on 12 targets, so that really helps his floor, getting that much work in the passing game. He also ran 7 times for 43 yards, so he made plays on the ground too. I think they have to get him double-digit touches rushing the ball, though, and I think it's going to happen this week. Hackett's got to do a better job of coaching that team, and I think he's going to make it a point to get Williams heavily involved against a Texans team that allowed the 3rd most fantasy points of running backs last week. Who you sitting at running back level?
Yeah, for sitting, I'm going to be sitting Rashad Penny. So Kenneth Walker should be back week 2, and I think that's going to severely hurt Penny. I would not be comfortable starting Penny in any of my leagues. He had 12 carries for 60 yards last week, and that was him as a lone running back. Now with Kenneth Walker involved, I expect Penny to be right around 10 carries is my guess personally. They're going to be playing a San Francisco defense who is one of the most elite defenses in football, and I expect Seattle to be down and to turn to passing instead of rushing with Penny.
I'm sitting Dameon Pierce with the Houston Texans. He had an opener to forget. He played just 29% of the snaps compared to 71% for Rex Burkhead. I don't quite get that. I think it's going to be more of a timeshare this week. This week, more of a 50-50 split. But even with that said, I don't like him in a tough matchup against Denver. They allowed the fewest fantasy points to running backs last week. They have a very good front 4. I think he's a risky play right now. I still think overall he's not going to be a huge bust like a lot of people are saying. I think he's going to emerge and end up being the top back for Houston. But I don't like him this week in this matchup, especially after the way he was used last week. All right, a sleeper at running back, Logan. Who's your sleeper?
Yeah, I'm going with J.D. McKissic as my sleeper. I would almost feel comfortable putting him in my flex spot depending on what you have on your lineup. I expect it to be a shootout game versus Detroit, and this is why I picked Wentz as well. This is going to be a very high-scoring game, I personally think. Both teams had pretty high-scoring games week 1. Washington got out to a kind of a big lead against Jacksonville to start out the game. They scored 2 early touchdowns with that, and they kind of turned to Antonio Gibson on the ground. But with this being a shootout game, I also think Detroit wins this game, so I expect McKissic plays better when they're playing behind and they turn to passing, so I expect that to be the case in week 2.
I like that. I have Devin Singletary. He's another guy that kind of fell down draft boards. People were worried about James Cook cutting into his playing time, but Singletary played 59% of the snaps in week 1, so he dominated the work. They still rotated backs, but still, he was the guy on top. Played almost 60% of the snaps, had 10 touches for 62 yards in the game. I thought he looked good with his chances. I think he'll get more work in this offense going forward. He plays Tennessee this week. They allowed a league-high 394 rushing yards in the opener. Wow. I think Singletary could really have a big showing in this one. I like him a lot in this match.
He also had James Cook with a fumble on his first carry.
Exactly.
So
not a
even helped Singletary even more.
Not a great way to endear yourself to the coaching staff. Okay, the receiver spot. Let's move there. Talk about your start for this week.
Yeah, I'm going to be starting Hunter Renfrow at wide receiver this week. So the Raiders pounded Devontae Adams in his first game with the team. They absolutely just threw to him every single chance they got. And Renfrow only saw six targets, but I expect that to be a lot more even this upcoming week. And With Renfrow, he had such a good year last year. Bringing in Adams hurt his value so much, but I expect defenses to mainly focus on Adams this week after he absolutely destroyed the defense for the Chargers last week. So I expect them to get Renfrow more involved.
So I'm doing something similar to you, going with a player that did not have a good week one. I have Allen Robinson as a start. He had a terrible opener. Don't get me wrong. He caught just a pass for 12 yards on 2 targets. Here's the good news. He was on the field for 97% of the snaps. So it wasn't like he was not out there running routes and trying to get open. He was there. I think he's going to get more involved. I know Cooper Kupp is Matthew Stafford's safety net there, but still, I think Robinson that's going to be more of a fluke than the norm for him. I think he's going to come back and do well this week. Good matchup against the Falcons. They allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to receivers in week 1, so I'm looking for a big rebound game from Robinson. How about a sit now at the receiver spot?
Yeah, I'm going to be sitting Chase Claypool. It's going to be very hard for me to start Claypool any week. He only had 18 receiving yards week 1, and that includes like a full overtime. And it was a decently high-scoring game with Pittsburgh and Cincinnati with a little over 40 points scored. It's just hard for them to get him involved in the game. They try to use him with rushing the ball, but with targets, I mean, they're very focused on Deontay Johnson, especially with Trubisky throwing. You're going to be looking at 250 yards most likely with him passing in. That's just too low for him to get involved as the number 2 wide receiver. And then you also got Pickens, who you're going to try to get involved too in the receiving game.
Yeah, and he seemed to like Pat Freiermuth a lot too.
He did.
He got a lot of targets.
Freiermuth got tons of targets week 1.
I'm going to sit Treylon Burks. So the good news was he wasn't on the field a whole lot, played just 37% of the snaps, but he still had 3 catches for 55 yards, so I thought that was encouraging. He had 5 targets, playing just 37% of the snaps. But the bad news was he still wasn't on the field a lot. So I want him to get on the field more to optimize his chances. And it worries me this week if he plays that low amount against the Bills. They have one of the best defenses in all of football. Did a great job against the Rams last week outside of Cooper Kupp. And Treylon Burks is not Cooper Kupp. So I'm looking for Burks to struggle in this game. Again, I think it bodes well for him going forward because he made a lot of plays with the targets he had. But I just worry about him in this matchup against a really good Buffalo defense. Okay, how about a sleeper for you, Logan, for the receiver spot?
Yeah, for sleeper, I'm going to go with Ayuk for this week. I expect the 49ers to use Deebo Samuel even more as a running back this week with Elijah Mitchell out, which would put Ayuk in that number 1 wide receiver role with Deebo in the backfield. They're going to be very creative with their offense again, just like usual. And I expect Ayuk to get a lot more targets this week. So,
yeah, that first week game with San Francisco and Chicago, a lot of people are flying off the handle some of the performances from Trey Lance, Cole Kmet, Ayuk. It was a torrential rain. I mean,
it was terrible.
It was awful. So don't take too much stock into that game and don't give up on 49ers and Bears because of that week 1 game. I'm looking for a lot of those guys to rebound. I like that call on Ayuk. Sleeper for me at receiver is Corey Davis. I think he got overlooked a little bit in the offseason for fantasy owners, but he remains a starter in New York. He played the 2nd most snaps at receiver last week for the Jets, 68% of the snaps, caught 6 passes for 77 yards on 9 targets. A lot of looks from Joe Flacco. I think he's going to have a consistent role in this offense on a weekly basis. I'm looking for him to do well again this week. I think he just got overlooked a little bit, and he's going to be a consistent factor until those younger guys get up to speed in the offense. So I would consider using him this week in week 2.
For sure.
All right, tight end spot, Logan. Last one, position we're going to hit. Who's your start?
Yeah, I'm going to be starting Tyler Higbee. So Higbee had 11 targets week 1 after coming that last. He kind of took all of Robinson's targets. So
that's true.
He also had a lot of drops, though. So, I mean, he only had 5 or 6 receptions during week 1. But, I mean, most of them were pretty easy drops as well. But I love how often Stafford was targeting Higbee. And this is also going to be a game where the Rams are going to put up a ton of points against Atlanta. So I expect him. I mean, he should have a good chance to find the end zone as well this week.
I like Zach Ertz with Arizona. I know he's battling, it's a groin injury, right, with him?
Yes. Yep.
And he's been slowed in practice, but he had it last week. He played 60% of the snaps, so obviously he's not hurt too bad. They're probably going to limit him in practice again this week. He did not get a lot of catches last week, but he scored a touchdown, converted a 2-point try. I think he's going to do better this week against the Raiders. They allowed the 5th most fantasy points of tight ends in week 1. I'm looking for Ertz to have a good showing here. I'm not too worried about that injury, especially with how much he played last week. Who's your sit at tight end, Logan?
Yeah, I'm going to be sitting Dawson Knox. He came into the season probably as the 6 or 7 tight end being drafted overall. He only had 5 yards in week 1, and that's with the Bills putting up a lot of points. So he only had 2 targets, 1 reception for the 5 yards. Diggs and Gabriel Davis absolutely dominated that offense with Josh Allen. I mean, they're turning into a 1-2 powerhouse with that offense, and it kind of scares me away from Dawson Knox with how heavily targeted those 2 wide receivers are getting involved. And you also got Isaiah McKenzie, who scored the touchdown with that offense.
I think Knox could end up being kind of a touchdown-dependent player, so he's going to be
very much so.
Tough guy to trust. Good call. I'm sitting Noah Fant. Surprised me last week. He did not even lead the Seahawks tight ends in snaps. Will Disley played 67% of the snaps, while Fant played 56%. Now, Fant did have 3 catches for 16 yards on 4 targets, so he did get some work, but not good that he was not getting more snaps than Will Disley, in my opinion. Plays the 49ers this week. I know I just talked about that being terrible weather, but still, they held Cole Kmet without a catch in week 1. I don't want any part of Fant in this match.
Yeah, and
personally.
a lot of people forget about Disley. 2 years ago, Disley was a solid fantasy production player. Last year, he had that injury that knocked him out the entire year. But before that, I mean, he can battle out Fant for that starting role. And
he has a knack for the big play for whatever reason.
For
too.
sure,
he's done that on occasion. Okay, how about a sleeper at tight end, Logan?
Sleeper. This is my ride or die pick, and it died first week. So Irv Smith Jr. is my sleeper pick for the Vikings. So the Vikings said that they want to get Irv Smith more involved in their passing game after week 1. He only had 2 targets week 1. And I expect him to have a bounce back game this week after not having any receptions week 1. So I'm going to be targeting him as my sleeper pick. And he might have been dropped in most of your leagues, so go ahead and pick him up. I love him.
All right. I like Evan Ingram as a sleeper tight end. He got some looks in the opener, 4 catches, 28 yards. I know not great numbers, but that's not terrible. The tight end position was pretty bad last week. Mm-hmm. So the good news for me is Ingram was on the field for 71% of the snaps. I think that's good news. The Colts allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to tight ends in week 1. I know I said Trevor Lawrence is my sit, but still, I think he could still post some yardage numbers in this matchup. And Ingram might get a lot of looks, and I think that could be the case on a lot of weeks for this Jacksonville team to see Ingram involved in the offense.
For sure.
All right, Logan, those are our starts, sits, and sleepers for week 2 of the fantasy football season. Thanks so much for doing this with me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jeff. Everyone remember, Pick'em tab, over under 0.5 TDs for Justin Herbert. So take advantage of that as the game will play tonight in a couple hours.
Yeah, we're just giving it to you. So just take advantage of it. Go to rtsports.com/
DFS Pick'em.
DFS Pick'em, okay. All right. This has been Jeff Power for Real Time Fantasy Sports. Really appreciate you joining me, and I hope you all have a great day.
Take care.